Next, our talk about where is the weather, obtaining scientifically relevant data in the field, presented by Dr. John Corbett, co-founder, president, and chief executive officer for AWARE.
Good afternoon, everyone. So where I'd like to start is to say that as you think about agriculture, farmers, as you know, are going to be acutely conscious of the weather, whether it's the 10 o'clock news in some parts of the world or a simple forecast. Right out of the FAO, they also say something else. And what they really are saying here is that one of the most important concepts in agriculture is localization. And that's a deep driving force in this company that we've created. I'm an agricultural climatologist with a geography type background. And from the very beginning, when I had a postdoc at CIMMYT, the first question that really kind of came to me from the breeding programs was, where should I take this particular variety? I've got a set of attributes about the variety, we've heard this. Where would be most appropriate? And that's a very interesting question, where, because there's so much involved in one determining it, and there's so much value if you do it right. Now that's sort of an interesting precedent or assumption to start this conversation today, because where I'm going to go is I'm going to say, okay, let's talk about the challenges that are in front of us. And interestingly, and with absolutely no pre-planned foresight, because that's what's kind of fun to say, people have already mentioned several of these things. And the maps that you see, I'm happy to actually share. If you send me an email, there's an interesting link that had all of these together recently. But I'm going to talk a little bit about what the challenge is and what we're really facing. I'm going to say something here about this concept of symmetrical information. It comes out of the insurance industry, but what it really means is that if everybody is basing their risk, as everybody's basing their decisions on the same set of information, then you can build a chain. And as you know, chains are defined by the strength of the weakest link. And that's one of the problems in sub-Saharan Africa, is there's exploitive relationships, and they never last. And so when you start talking about weather and agriculture, which are bound together, if you can inform research and science on where things should be applied, if you can inform input providers on things that they should be advising, if you can inform farmers about what they should be doing, and if you can inform buyers about what's coming off the land, all from the same foundation, what you end up with is symmetry. So prices are offered correctly, inputs are provided where and when needed, and you start getting a very interesting growth. Now here in the United States and in Europe and in parts of the more developed economies, this is a given. People have access to all of this information. In a lot of the world, actually, there's very little access. So we'll talk about that. We're going to talk a little bit about, in specific, what we've created, because this is an important asset that is coming into the community right now. This is something that has been really a kind of a career thing that I actually started at CIMMYT, building what are called weather surfaces, and I'll talk about that in a moment. And then we're going to take this into this space of, we've already heard about phones. This is the ultimate location device. I mean, I'm sorry, but you can whip out your cell phone and hit a button and it'll tell you where to find whatever restaurant 3 blocks from now, and it's unerring. Why? Because it's just there. Knowing where actually tells you a lot. And it is probably the most integrative of all attributes of data. Because if you know where something is, you can say things like, oh, well, if that's where your farm is, here's your weather risk, here's your pest and disease risk, here's how far you are to market, and oh, by the way, the storm is coming, okay? And this starts to change the nature of things. So the challenge, now we've already heard about this, so I'm not going to have to spend much time on it, but do you realize that if the population hits 9 billion in 2050, we're talking about 35 primary growing seasons in which we have to figure out how to feed 1.5 billion new people. Now that's a daunting challenge. Now we've heard today about 24 innovation labs. And I would suggest, and I used the term earlier, entrepreneurship. I'm going to suggest you need to be bold. 1% a year is not going to do it. We need to be entrepreneurial. There needs to be a sense of urgency that, yes, getting that publication out is a good idea for your career. Getting something adopted on the land by 1 million farmers may actually be more impactful. We need to think about these things because these are real. I heard the term today, someone said the bulge, the population bulge. Look at that map. That should just back up. You should show that to your students. Look at that map. There is a population bulge exactly where? Africa. And it's interesting because, interestingly enough, most Americans in particular are very ignorant of this. Africa is a big place. We heard earlier there's land in Mozambique, okay? Now, some parts of Africa are very constrained by a lot of biological and abiotic reasons. There's a lot of things going on here, but this is a big place, and there is opportunity. And so what we're talking about here then is something that is kind of dramatic, and it is going to be a challenge to the Soybean Innovation Lab. But the situation is even scarier than that. Now, I'm an agricultural climatologist. And I want to tell a little story here. Now, you all know, probably in abstract, but you all know what a heat engine is. A heat engine is just basically you heat something up, you put it next to something cold, and when the two things combine, nature says we want to all get it to be the same temperature. You get work performed where you have the contrast. Now, this thing I'm waving is called air. I know you all love it because it keeps you alive. You realize it's a very low viscosity fluid, and it surrounds the planet, and it has weight. Did you know that? I mean, of course you did, but did you ever think about it? So the poles are frozen, the tropics are warm, and it's warmed up by about 1 degree. And you all think, a degree, no big deal. What if I told you that if you add 1 degree of heat to a 5.5 quadrillion ton heat engine that's tilted, spins, and gets differential heat in the middle, think about the energy of the confluence of cold air and warm air. And that little bit of work just got really big. That's our environment. So everything we've heard about, growing things in Africa, about farmer local knowledge, about what's happening, a lot of that comes from history. And I hate to say it, but the environment we're in today isn't what it was 30 years ago, period. When you triple the variance of something, a lot of people like to talk about extreme events. What we mean by that is hurricanes and tornadoes. We've seen that here in the United States. You triple the variance, though, think about the impact of the rainy season. Think about the strange things that are happening and experiencing right now. And then I'm going to tell another one. It was in the Wall Street Journal on Saturday, okay? So I'm not going to quite get this right just because of it. It's a simple concept. They said, if you just look at the coldest temperature observed, just anywhere, the average today is 5 degrees warmer, okay? So what happens to bacterials, virals, and funguses in foliar diseases if the nighttime low temperature is warmer? You have a problem. It's an insidious problem. So the events are bigger. Yeah, those are dramatic ones. Agriculture needs, 90, 120 days of relatively no extreme events. But the insidious ones are, what if the nights are warmer? People are seeing diseases they've never seen before, and they don't know how to adapt to them. We heard earlier that just giving people better information can increase yields by 30%. By the way, I've seen that in writing. I've seen that. Just better information. We're not talking better genetics, just something knowing what to do in the face of uncertainty. So when we mention symmetrical information, it starts, in my world anyways, the contribution we make, and we're part of this puzzle, is to say, look, researchers need to know something about the variability in the weather. So do the input providers. The farmers obviously do. All of this has to be very localized, by the way. And the buyers need to know. Because if they know where a lot of stuff has been grown really well, they're going to send a bigger truck. If they send a bigger truck, they can offer a higher price per kilo. It's a very simple kind of an idea, but it is actually a realistic, if simple, concept. So when you think of the value chain, here's an interesting point. If you can handle information very localized, and you can help a grower very localized, and an ICT solves the problem of the final mile, right? So what if you could then aggregate it the other direction? So not only do you have food security information for the Minister of Agriculture, you have commodity information for Coca-Cola, all right? This is really big data at its best. And what big data really does is it says, hey guys, and I said this earlier, some people, most of the people in this room know all about what happened with Star Wars, right? Luke turned off the little visor thing that was giving him data on where to shoot, and he trusted the Force, and he won. Yeah, 1 in a million, right? Because I guarantee you, big data says, if you just keep doing what the data say, you're going to win in the long run. Sometimes a more palatable example, at least in the United States, is if we sat down to a poker table, we were playing Texas Hold'em, and every single hand, I got to turn over 2 cards and look at them that you didn't get to see. I'm not going to win every hand, but I will win. Why? Because I have more information. My point is, that's really what big data is. Now, our company produces a huge amount of weather data because we recognize that unless it's localized and accessible, it's not an asset. We've done both. And part of this is that we're not a weather company, we're an ag weather company. So Jean-Marcel mentioned earlier today with the IBP, we have an API. And part of their API was they said, look, we have all of these field trials where we know the location, the planting date, and the harvest date, but we would like to be able to search for traits and add to that searching for things by the environment. So because we have a global database, this latitude, longitude, and time is passed to us, and we pass back 25 characteristics of the growing season, right? We have early veg, mid-veg, flower, early grain, late grain. I mean, 5. It's relatively simplistic in its first manifestation, but now you can look for things by the dryness, or the humidity, or things about what happened. Because maybe the place you're in has changed and you need to ask a better, more specific question. It's about correct, yes? This is important teamwork, okay? They're not trying to do it themselves. We're really good at it, and this is really kind of all we do. We do things in this ag, weather, location intelligence space. So when you think of this, this is what we call weather terrain. What we mean by that is it's a grid. Now let me start off by saying, excuse me, I have to. When I was a postdoc at CIMMYT, I learned a technique that has to do with some really good ways to handle interpolation of weather data, and the satellites have subsequently filled in the only Achilles heel to that, which is rainfall. But what this really is a little bit different. Just conceptually, if you imagine normally weather stations, which are really valuable and you have to have them, but weather stations don't answer one critical question that all research scientists want to know. If you just invented the best, most tolerant, resistant, high-yielding soybean, first question someone's going to say, oh, great, where should your farmers grow it? And if you go look at a bunch of weather stations, you have no idea the area. What weather services give you is area. When you have area, you can prioritize. And my point about that is really profound. This grid is basically a grid that says we can produce it very accurately, by the way. All your temperature and humidity data are really accurate. Monsanto's been buying our data for a decade, and it's their biotech research group. They don't even put out weather stations most anymore. They stopped it. They tested it about 6, 7 years ago. They had 50 or 60 stations. They had hundreds of stations. It's too expensive. Ours were, I'm gonna be reasonable, were adequate. They were good enough. I'm saying they were actually much better, but that's a different story because that's what they'll say. But the point is they stopped bothering putting weather stations out in everywhere except where they needed hourly, where they were actually trying to track genetic expression by specific heat events. My point about this stack is, if you have all of this layered data, you can find where. And you have to realize GIS as a technology is brilliant because you can go grab other experts, do population density, literally by the square kilometer for the globe. So we can tell you how many people live in each grid cell. You can find soils data, sometimes poor, sometimes better, but you can then prioritize where you need better. You can even prioritize it by the constraint you're trying to solve. You can prioritize it by the distribution of conditions conducive to a particular virus fest or a fungus. So when you think about what we're doing is we're saying, hey, we have this system of big data that is accessible to the community. So with Peter, we've been in some discussions that maybe the Soybean Innovation Lab would find this useful. So these data offer something kind of interesting. First of all, we're going to do something no one else does. It's a little hard to see, and I apologize. This is one of my guys put this together backwards. But what you've really got is we're going to try to show you something that's very agile, because this is the other piece about applications today. All of the little colored areas, and I know they're hard to spot, these are just agroecological regions. And the idea is accuracy, because everybody always asks about that, and I'm willing to tell you, we're going to be very transparent. We're going to show you the accuracy for agroecological zones based on kind of your business question, because the accuracy is dependent on the business question. There's no such thing as accuracy, because an observation on the ground can differ from the grid cell it falls in, and it's not that one's inaccurate, they're just different. Because as you all know, a rain gauge right here might differ from a rain gauge a mile away or even 200 meters. My point is, we're going to make transparent the access to the differences between the on the ground and the gridded surfaces, just to reassure you that if what you're interested in is the onset of the rainy season, you're going to check it for that period of time, and someone else may say, no, I'm really only interested in what happens in the middle of the season, or maximum temperatures, or other stresses. We're going to open the door to that, because we feel that this makes what we do that much more rigorous, because of course the only way you make it better is to get the feedback from the users. So the whole point of this is applications. So right now there's an application you can freely accessible right now. You can just go to our website. It's Gates Foundation supports it, and you can do certain things with this application. And the application then says you can download. You can click on that button right there, just kind of highlight it. You can download it to a spreadsheet, and we're building a training module for how to do modeling inside of spreadsheets. I suspect most of you have encountered this before, right? You've encountered models in very clever things. The hard part, and I heard this, we have an agronomist on staff who's spent most of her career with USDA, and she said, there's hundreds of these models. They're not utilized because it's too hard to get the weather data into the spreadsheet. Well, we've solved that problem, okay, globally. And the point is, once you have a model running in a spreadsheet, we or you, if you make the API calls, which we'll get to in a minute, you can run it spatially. And of course, once you're running it spatially, you can now prioritize. You can see the spatial extent of a challenge. So one of the things we talk about here are, right now we have customers who take our observed data all through computer-to-computer discussion. We download by the entire global forecast, the GFS model. This is 192 hours of forecasted weather data. We download the entire global model. Right now we're doing it twice. Every 12 hours, we'll do it every 6 hours into the future. These things are pushed out to farmers. They're pushed out to farmers through companies that interface with the farmers. Obviously, we have no particular advantage in Ghana, for example, or in Mozambique. But we make partnerships with them because they can pull it from our API. Now, an API is an application programmer interface. This is what, in fact, the Generation Challenge Program's software does. And the point is that there are newspapers who take it as an automatic every day. It just sends them an email, and they read it over, they put it in the print, or they read it over the radio station. You're making accessible, highly localized information. We also can do services. This may be of interest. We can track whatever number of demonstration or field trials you want. You just latitude, longitude, when did you plant, and every day you could get emailed a spreadsheet if that's what you want, with all the weather data built into it. Growing degree days, total precipitation, et cetera. These are services that you can perform on top of this. Again, the point is it's an asset. Take something off the table that probably most places, most teams don't have agricultural climatologists. They just don't have someone on staff. These skill sets, you can see the difference this year just by clicking a button. Click on that field trial and you'll realize, you know what, it's way warmer than normal this year. These are really important. And I'm very pleased to tell you, we have only 27. We have 27 in some of the more remote parts of Africa. So we have some in South Sudan that are operational, some in Mali. And when I was little, the most remote place on earth was Timbuktu. It just was. We have a station going up in Timbuktu. We have one in Gao. Okay, I mean, we can do things. We have partnerships, people who can do this. And these help calibrate our data. We help calibrate the rainfall data. We know this. Weather drives agriculture in sub-Saharan Africa. Agriculture drives the economy. You're going to need this sort of weather data. And we have a platform then to help manage it because it is spatially variable and spatially extensive. So part of what we bring to the table is some really good technology focused on ag and some domain expertise that might be useful to your program and projects. Location intelligence, as I mentioned, it integrates everything. I mean, you can take a village and say how far they are from the port, from a market. You can tell something about the soils, you know the weather, and you know the weather risk. That weather terrain is a stack over time, which you can look at. When we talk about a tripling of the variance of weather, you can see it. You can actually see this and say, well, wait a minute, the rainy season is not what they expect it to be. How does it impact what intervention I'm trying to bring to the land? So a platform exists out there for data management. It helps with these kinds of things. We would be part of a team here on how to do certain things. Round-trip information flow is very important. When farmers tell us things like, anybody can get a forecast, but when you tell me an ag weather system, when you planted and what you planted, you can get back expected harvest date and what year looks like this year. So like maybe 2008 is a lot like this year for your farm. And you remember, oh man, that was this. I know what to do now. Just being able to plug this into that historical record set offers an advantage to growers because growers remember that kind of thing. And these are the sorts of assets then that are out there today. Big data is important. And there's only 35 primary growing seasons left. There needs to be teamwork and find expertise and leverage into it. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, John. I will open it for questions.
Thank you for a wonderful presentation. You said something about farmers can tell us things. And I'm curious as to how you engage the farmers in telling you things. How does that happen? Are there any good models? Because I'm seeing it come to a certain level, but then does it go that extra mile?
That's actually that's a great question, because that is the nexus of everything. If you're going to do something localized, obviously you need to talk to the local person. And I left my smartphone on the desk over there, but on the table. That's what a smartphone does. That's what a feature phone does. So we're working with a partner. Some of you in Ghana may have heard of a company called Isoko, for example. Isoko sends out all kinds of information. They have 70-something thousand farmers in their network right now. They didn't collect location except by village, but that's close enough to get the right forecast. When their farmers, some of whom are illiterate, they feed them a weather forecast using emoticons that they have trained them to interpret, smiley faces, for rainfall and rainfall in the afternoon versus morning, and various slices of things that help them make better decisions. Now, it can go upwards from there. You can send out, even to a feature phone, simple 3 questions, 1, 2, or 3. Is it this, this, or this? You get information back. That information back then alters the information you send forward, because now you know more about what they need to know. Now, that's in the case of, say, in Isoko. We have commercial growers who manage 50 or 60 vegetable fields. In every single field, we know what crop, what variety, when it was planted, and we're feeding them back harvest date predictions, and for labor purposes, how many acres are coming into productivity in the next 2 weeks by day. Because their biggest challenge actually is labor management, as opposed to some of the more specific farm-based things. It's really trying to get the pickers and things like that. But you have to close the final mile. So we pay very close attention and look out for any group that is facing farmers and simply needs content, because we're optimized to deliver that content however they wish. So this is the magic of big data.
John, just to make sure that I understood it correctly, how often the information and the data get updated? Because there's some weather prediction the software and data that predict a week or 2 in the future, but this prediction keeps changing. So does this information, the feedback you get from the farmer, is what will make you change it, like every 12 hours, or the prediction, or every 24 hours?
If I understand correctly, your question is in terms of updating. So our system, like as I said, you can go online right now, and there's the Gates supports it, so it's actually public facing. It's free. You can log in, and any place you click on, we update for that system in 192 hours, 8-day forecast every day. Now, it turns out that once you start working with growers, they actually want that updated at least every 12 hours, if not every 6 hours. So we're actually processing, and you have to understand, this is a gargantuan amount of data. Okay, this is the entire global forecasting system, which is a grid of roughly 15 arc minutes, 27-kilometer grid over all of terrestrial Earth. We're downloading that, processing it, and pushing it back out. 192 hours worth of data, because that way we can run our foliar disease condition conducive models, seeking specific temperatures around specific humidities that would indicate conditions are conducive for, say, May streak. Okay, and you can do this, and that sends a warning. Now, your other question about the observed data obviously they're daily at this point. We update it, so yesterday or 2 days ago data is available. So now you're looking at what actually happened, and then a short-term forecast. We have a consortium that has been started that we're a member of, called the Rocky Mountain Consortium for Global Development. I'm very pleased to tell you this, that UCAR and NCAR and CSU are all involved, and they are working on a seasonal forecast model, which would be a daily, literally running out 120 days. And if this can get funded, I think this is actually a magnificent forward-looking piece of information that will very much help which varieties you want to put in the ground in any particular location. So these are things that are in the roadmap.
Thank you, and that's exactly the question I wanted to ask. Is as a farmer would want to know, is it going to be a dry year or a wet year? How close are we getting to be able to make those kinds of predictions?
Well, I'm not the person to ask in one sense. My science doesn't lend itself into the climate change people, but I will tell you that NCAR and the climate scientists there actually believe that I'm going to say this the right way, they need to do one of these regional models for a 120-day forecast, knowing that it won't be perfect, but perfect is definitely in the way of excellent. And they need to do one to start to do them more accurately in the future. So I believe the science, they would say, is very engaging. There was a climate scientist gave a presentation 2 weeks ago, and the NCAR guys were practically on the edge of their seat just saying, we need to do that because everybody needs a seasonal forecast before the season. Because if you could make, and I call it weather agile, if you could have 6 varieties available inside an ag service provider, short season, mid season, long season type things, drought tolerant type things, and you can tell people, look, this is going to be a good rainy season, people can really produce, they'll know what to do. And I think it's really important. And so we are encouraging, we're helping in our own way. We because we manage gridded data so well, and all of you know, climate change, GCM models are all gridded. We're the delivery mechanism for this. We're already built for it, and that was one of the more important pieces that was missing because NCAR has they have no way to deliver things, and partnering is allowing them to deliver this now. This has been a relationship that's been nurturing for a couple years now. It's going better and better.
John, thank you. Rita Mumm from the University of Illinois Soybean Innovation Lab. Your technology is very intriguing because it has obviously huge potential when combined with other types of big data. And we live in an age of big data. So you mentioned, for example, combining weather data with pathology forecasts. And I could see the use for weather data of this type in explaining G by E at a very pinpoint type level. And G by E is something that breeders seek to address in every breeding cross we make. There's almost no crops that are not affected by G by E. Maybe greenhouse only crops or something like this. No crops I know and work with. So could we get your insights into your business model for different kinds of big data that you would like to combine your big data with?
So I'm gonna make a very brief answer, and I'm gonna turn this one right over to my colleague there, because sorry, Jean-Marcel, but you're perfectly tuned to this one. When I first started at CIMMYT, this G by E concept, they tried to explain it to me, and I demonstrated once again that I have a very thick head, because I'm not sure I can even spit it back 20 years later, what this idea. I understand that often the environment was simply relegated to having done it in 4 or 5 locations and hoping to find a pattern. I think what's evolving today is this localized sort of weather data should give insights into things that you couldn't before, and I know that's why Monsanto buys our data. It's localized, and it's the biotech people. They're looking for genetic expression right there in that field. And so I'm suggesting there's a huge opportunity to learn and do a lot of things, and partnering is the way to do it. This is our expertise. I'm not a geneticist. Jean-Marcel, would you care to amplify a bit?
Well, I think that, really the G by E is a nightmare, right, for all breeder in developing countries. And definitely to bring, or at least one dimension like climate in the equation helped a lot. And you can understand much better the genetics, just taking this as a variable into your equation and understand better the rationale. Now, if it allows you to predict, all this issue of prediction is really something that is much more a bit, I think, of a black box for me. However, to come back on your point, Rita, is really about, I think, the trends that something can be done. For example, again, I'm not an expert, correct me, but I think the trends, they are very clear. It's more difficult to predict at the season level. Yeah. But over 5 years, if you look in the back, you know where you will be the next 5 years. And I think if we can link this information with, for example, selection index, under stress condition or non-optimal condition, and access to germplasm, identify what I think we call ortholog sites. So,
Yes.
In 5 years, my site will look like the site that is actually there on the map. I can think what they are targeting, in terms of their breeding traits and what kind of germplasm is available. And since breeding takes a lot of time, although it's increasing in speed with the markers, then you can even anticipate the condition where you will be in a few years. And I think there is quite some gain to be achieved at this level, just again having this knowledge about, performance, germplasm availability, and target traits. So I think this is extremely powerful in this regard.
Thank you. I guess the other comment, just to make specific, that cube, every one of those grid cells could have in it the output of a model for that day that said conditions were conducive or not for a particular, say, viral disease. And that over time actually does for weather, does for agronomy, does for genetics, exactly the kinds of things that right now, these data are, weather data are multifunction. You filter them differently and they can serve a very different purpose. For example, the malaria people are very interested in the rainfall data because you can predict mosquito outbreaks just by how much rain falls. There are models about little puddling, how long it takes and what temperature it takes for that larva to do this, to come out, to mature, to bite a person, to have it transfer from the gut back to the saliva, the parasite. These are things that science can help with. And this is where I'm asking and I'm pointing out, we need to be bold here, folks. We need to stop thinking in cubbyholes and start thinking like teamwork. And I say that because this sort of a click here where you go from a field trial, look, every one of those field trials and clicking on it, and in one step, a scientist seeing that, in fact, the nighttime temperatures have been way warmer than normal, that might be a clue to that individual, I'm overlooking something here, and then nudging that science in a better direction. And so this is the awareness part and the visualization part that big data brings to the table as well. It's very visual as a rule.
Tom Shaw, CRS, I'm going to ask one of the hard questions and maybe
Sure.
one of the easier, pricing.
Just
My second question is, have you worked with anyone yet on weather indexed insurance using the data? And if not, would you be willing? But something about pricing.
So we've done some historical work with micro-insure. Our data are much better than when we started then. We have Colorado State University has a research scientist who works on some polar orbiting satellites, and he produces a instantaneous rainfall every hour. So we actually process a global 9-kilometer grid of hourly rainfall. And so we're getting there. So it's big data. Your first question was pricing. Pricing is expensive for Monsanto and a lot less so for you. And that's just fair. That's just geography. Because they're interested in commercial. And in sub-Saharan Africa, we talk about things like $1 a year for a smallholder farmer because there's no point in trying to do any more than that. Mind you, there's a lot of them. There's a lot going on in the weather today with this increased variability, for example, in vegetable growing, where they don't traditionally use any weather data. They just say it's a 90-day crop. And I ask them, when was the last time it actually took 90 days? Oh, never. I don't remember the last time. It's always 82 or 107. I'm like, well, we can help you with that. And they get it. There's a lot of value here, and we have to demonstrate the value. By the way, I get to say this in this group because I'm the last speaker. I'm an entrepreneur. That's what we've done here. We have taken innovation, which started in the CG system with a problem that I identified. It was something that was near and dear to my heart. And we've built a company that's accelerating, and we're accelerating the word in the entrepreneur lexicon is we're not emerging anymore. We've done that. We've raised some capital, and I've got a team. We've hired 17 people so far this year and have another 11 to go to fill out a couple of teams that we know. And I'll have 52 people on staff probably by January. So we've got a cohort of agriculturally focused data scientists and software engineers that deliver this, and that's what we do. And Michael Cullen, my colleague in the back, I love to say this, Michael, he has a ag economist PhD from Oxford. That just makes me sound, and we hire some people who are way smarter than me to carry some of this opportunity into networks. So your insurance question is a good one, and I believe that selling insurance in sub-Saharan Africa directly to farmers is painful, and I seriously doubt it's commercially viable in very many places. That's just an entrepreneur speaking, because I know how hard it is to find customers. On the other hand, selling insurance of a trade area type to an ag service provider might make a ton of sense, where you underwrite, say the guy sold 10 tons of fertilizer last year, and you go to him and you say, look, our actuarials show that in your trade area where you're willing to sell fertilizer in any given year, you should be able to sell 30 or 40 tons. We will tell you where it rains, where you're likely to find an ROI that says, buy that extra few kilos. We'll tell you where to go, and we'll underwrite your purchase of 30 tons. And then you work it out. You say, well, if it rains in this much area, you're not going to get paid. If it's really dry, we'll pay you. Take the risk out. That's a suggestion, by the way. Michael, who is it we're talking with tomorrow?
Well, there's the group at IFC that we're working with. There's a number of groups in Europe also that we're talking with. And I think this model of doing it at the value chain level seems to be a lot more practical than doing it at the farm level. As anybody who's done the research, the ag economists, especially one at Ohio State who's looked at this, and the risk is just too high to do it farmer by farmer. But I think this kind of visibility that John is suggesting with the weather data that can be so localized helps reduce that risk. In addition, if you can have a structure where you're pooling the risk of many different farmers whose weather risk you can have some understanding of, that reduces the bank's exposure if it's going through a bank or the IFC or somebody like that. So I'd be happy to talk to you about that, Tom.
Interesting that he made it. Let's see if I can even remember it. Couple of points. Risk is increasing. I think everybody will agree that. I'm sorry. It's just dangerous. It is. Food security is serious. I apologize. I have forgotten. There's an important point about risk in the. I'll leave it. I apologize. I'm skipping. My head is going very fast trying to listen to these questions. So.
Yeah, John, I'll give you a second to remember that because I'm sure it's going to be very worthwhile to hear it. But Rita, I wonder for some of us, talk about the GBIE and kind of dreaming like John's asking us to do about weather. How would weather information make a difference in what? I mean, maybe.
As a plant breeder, I'm trying to produce high-performing cultivars for a given market area. And almost never does that market area have a uniform climate or set of environments like soil type, like cultural practices that farmers employ. And so what happens then is I have to fragment my market area into specific environments that are much more uniform and try to find the best cultivar, the cultivar that performs the best for that more uniform subset of environments. Now, it's kind of dealt with as a black box kind of thing in breeding in a way. I mean, we know that we need to deal with G/E, and so we try to identify those subsets of environments that are similar to each other and then do our testing individually for that subset. But if it's not a perfect situation because even within that subset, there's change that's happening with climate change. There are non-uniform conditions even within that subset. And in a way, what I'm trying to do as a breeder when I devise those subsets or identify those subsets, I'm trying to say, okay, well, that's kind of my dry region, and here's my higher altitude region, and here's sandy soils over here. And I'm trying to identify what are those characteristics that's actually setting that subset apart by and large. It seems to me like the weather data gives you insights into some of the very primary underlying causes for the subsetting by environment. And so and there's a huge trend right now in breeding for climate resilient crops to try to incorporate stress tolerances So, talk about the extremes. We now have rice varieties that have both flooding tolerance and drought tolerance combined in the same cultivars. Yeah. I mean, you're, as a breeder, you're looking out for, what are these extremes that in stress that are going to potentially hit my crop in my subsets of growing regions. And so if I'm, for example, interested in drought tolerance, if I could identify those locations that even within a particular year basically signify drought tolerance or droughty locations. And that might actually vary from year to year, right? You get rain here, you don't get rain there. Even within a subset, in the U.S., for example, this year was great for rainfall, not so much for the 2 previous years. They would be considered droughty years. If I'm a breeder trying to develop better cultivars, I want to make my selection decisions based on rationale that I can understand in terms of, understanding this G/E factor. So if I could identify those locations that for which I've tested progeny from a breeding cross that represent drought, I can better select for the drought tolerance trait that I want to capture and bring into my improved cultivar. I mean, it's kind of a this is kind of a general type of example, but it seems to me like the weather data could be actually doing a much better job of defining what it is that identifies those subsets of populations, or maybe redraws the boundaries among those subsets of populations. So breeders are doing a better job with their testing and their selection decisions based on those tests.
Thank you. That even helps. Again, I learn all the time on this. I think from my statistics, what I would say, it helps you segment your population so your statistics speak more clearly as to the signal, because even the in-season distribution of the rainfall can make a significant difference on what you mean by drought tolerance. So here you can see it. Then I would invite you to realize that the system that we've set up, you can write your own app. You literally could just, you've got young people and they know exactly what to do, but you could say, I need to know this about this part of the growing season. Our API will allow you to pass a latitude, longitude, and a date and get whatever you need back for just the period you're looking for. In other words, you don't have to try to synthesis, you don't have to try to pull it out of a spreadsheet. You actually can pull exactly what you want with an app you develop. I mean, that's the real strength of big data, is the ability for machine to machine to talk to each other through your application. You don't need us. I mean, literally, you don't. Now, I did remember what I wanted to say, if I may. What we were talking about is innovation versus entrepreneurship. When I asked Rob Bertram, I hear the word innovation a lot. What I don't hear is the bringing in of the science and literally the business sense of what it means to be an entrepreneur. It's very different. I went from being a reasonably adept research scientist at SIM at ICRAF and then Texas A&M for a while to having to figure out this whole new thing, and it's been a rather stressful 15 years, but it's been really fascinating. And the reason why I say the word entrepreneurship, let me tell you the words that come out here. If you want innovation in science, you're doing the right thing. If you want to scale it, you need entrepreneurship, period. Because innovation, if you build it, they will come, actually never happens, period. Okay? You might come out with the best variety in the world. If you do not have someone who knows how to push it into the marketplace, it will not get utilized. There are very few exceptions to that rule. I would also say that when companies come up with innovation, they get angel investors, people who are willing to put in $20,000, $50,000 to help you learn your business model. When you can show your business model, then venture capital comes in and puts millions in because they want to scale it. In other words, yeah, they invest in the technology, but they actually don't invest in your business model. There's a big difference between those two things. Okay, and so from an innovation lab perspective, maybe the corollary that needs to start coming on board is the scaling piece, that entrepreneurship piece that says, for $1 million, I can impact 1 million farmers. Whereas if you don't spend that million, you might impact 10 10,000 farmers. And that's unfortunate. I want to remind you, we have 35 primary growing seasons left to feed 1.5 billion new human beings in the next 35 seasons. There's not time to do this slowly. There needs to be some bold steps taken, some entrepreneurship. So,
Thank you, John.